Hey, what's going on everyone? So in this video, I'm going to be showing you how to add in basic audio calling functionality into your website using the Agora Web SDK. So this is going to be a short video where we just focus on that basic integration, but this video is actually part of a mini series where we're building out an application with these audio chat rooms. So basically a user can join any room with a room name and then join that room and speak to other users. So that's the mini series, but you don't have to follow along with that series if you just want to learn this basic functionality here. I will catch you up and explain where all the code is coming from and what we've set up so far, which isn't much, but you should be able to follow along, understand that part, and then just continue with this. So let's do a quick recap of what you need to get started, because this is one of the first videos in that series, and we'll continue from there. So first of all, make sure you have an account on agora.io. So I'll just go ahead and open the website up here. Make sure you go to Agora.io, create an account, and in your Agora account, you're gonna have this console, and you're gonna need to create an app with Agora first. So this is how Agora tracks your usage minutes and everything you're doing within your app. So make sure you go to this project management tab, go ahead and create an app here and call it something like voice, rooms, or just give it some kind of name here. As far as the use case, let's just go ahead and select social. I actually already have an app ID created, but I want to show you something very important here, and that is the authentication mechanism. So if you're following this tutorial, you are going to need to make sure that you have this authentication mechanism set up. That is the app ID only mode. That is very important, because if you select this one, which is something that you should actually use for production, this requires a token, and this is something that we're not actually going to use in this specific mini series. So we're not going to focus on that token part. We want to authenticate only with an app ID, which isn't really secure, but we're just trying to build out this demo, so we're going to focus on that. So if you select this one, you're going to have issues in this series, so don't select this one for now. Okay, so go ahead and create your app. Once you do, you're going to see your app right here. There's a list of apps. Go ahead and click this app ID section. So just copy that. That's going to give you that app ID, and this is what you're going to use. So once we get to that part in the video, make sure that is the app ID you're using, and that's your Agora app. So as far as the actual Agora documentation, let's go to the website again. I want to make sure you know where to find the documentation and the API reference. So let's just jump to documentation. We have all these different SDKs, and what we're doing here is going to be voice calling. So this is part of the Agora RTC SDK. There are two core SDKs. There's RTM and RTC. The RTM one is now signaling, but we'll talk about that one later. So this is the documentation for voice calling. If you go to the API reference, specifically select web, go to web SDK. This is where you're going to see all those methods that we're working with, and this is going to be very important. So a lot of these are going to be familiar to you. We're going to see this create client method. That's very important. That's how we kick off our connection with our client object. We'll see methods for creating microphone and audio tracks, creating video tracks, because you could do video calling with Agora, and so on. So there's all these methods here to respond to when users join, leave a specific room. So this is what we'll be referring to, and it's very important to know where this is at. So when you're following along with the video, you can always go back to this. So let's go ahead and jump into the code we have so far, and we'll just start building this out. Okay, so let's pick up where we left off from in the last video, and I'll just do a quick recap. So this is the link to the GitHub repo with all the source code. If you're new to this series, you're going to want to go ahead and find that link down in the video description, and specifically you're going to want this folder right here. This will give us a source code to this specific video here. So if you're following that series, you remember that we have this guide.md file, and that was what we followed in the last video to build our boilerplate code. So we set up everything with Vite, so that's something to take note of. And we just added in some HTML and CSS, and we are at this section right here where we are getting started with Agora. So that's all we did in the last video for anybody new to this series. This is our application, so we just added in that styling so you can actually use that GitHub repo, copy and paste this if you want. Otherwise, just follow along with the actual lesson. And we just added in some HTML here. We quickly just created this container wrapper, and we added everything in. We have a room header that gives us information with all the buttons that we need, and a form with just a submit button. So not much to it. And then we also just created this members div where we're adding members too. So again, that's all we did, not much to it. Let's go ahead and continue from there. So we'll go back to the guide.md file. And right now we need to install the Agora RTC SDK. So let's go ahead and run that install. So it's Agora RTC SDK-NG. NG stands for new generation. Okay, so we'll run that install. So we'll do npm install agora-rtc-sdk-ng, and that should add that to our package.json file. So that's added in here somewhere. There we go. So we have Agora added, and we can start building out this application. Okay, so the first thing we're going to do is go into main.js. So this is all linked up, and we need to first configure Agora and just make sure that all those credentials are added in, and then we start creating that client object that we're going to use all that functionality from. So the first thing I want to do here is go ahead and make an import for the Agora RTC class here, and this is that global entry point to our RTC SDK, and this is what gives us access to all those methods that we saw within the API reference to do what we need to do here. So next, what I want to do is go ahead and create my basic configuration here to the actual app that we created within our Agora console. So first thing I need is my app ID, and I'm actually going to add mine in, but I'm going to hide it for now. So we're just going to do your app ID, and just for this tutorial, go ahead and add yours in right here, or maybe add it into the next file that we're about to add. But this is going to be the app ID that was attached to that specific project. So we're going to need to add that in here somewhere. So I'll add that in a second, but we're going to create the variable. Next, we're going to need a token. Now, when we created that app ID, we specifically specified the authentication mechanism to app ID only, and we don't need a token for this specific demo app. So we're going to still create the variable, but we're just going to set that value to null. So because we set that when we created our app, adding in null right here actually works just fine. And the next thing I need to do is create a UID for every single user within a specific channel. So when we're joining specific rooms, every user needs a unique identifier, so some kind of ID for that specific user. So we're going to go ahead and create an RTC UID, and go ahead and prefix it with RTC because we're going to use the Agora RTM SDK, and that user will also need an ID. So I specifically want to make sure we can differentiate those two IDs. So for this value, if you actually go to this guide.md file, I actually have a method here. I just don't want to write it out. We're going to generate a random number. For the RTC SDK, that UID needs to be a 32-bit integer. So it has to be an integer. Let's go ahead and do that. This is going to generate a random number. It's going to make it very large. That way there's a chance that we're not going to, or a good chance that each ID will be unique. And we can also add in security checks just to make sure no user has a duplicate ID. But we're not going to focus on that. That should give us a big enough number to randomize those specific UIDs. Now, as far as the configuration, let's go ahead and create a room ID, and I'm using let for a reason because later on we're actually going to set this value dynamically. But right now we're only going to be able to join one room. So this is that specific room ID here, or the channel name, and we're just going to call it main. So later on this would be something like devrel that we saw in that introduction video, or any name that you provided, or some kind of generic generated name. For now it's only one channel name. We'll work on this later. And the next thing I want to do is create an object that stores my audio tracks for the local user. That's going to be me, and any remote user that joins this specific channel. So that means anyone else that joins the channel, I want to store their tracks here too, so we can actually remove them, mute them if we need, and do all sorts of stuff like that. So we actually want access to those. And this is going to be local audio tracks. And for the local user, this value is just going to be set to null. So this will be my audio tracks here when I join a room. And then we'll just do remote audio tracks, and we're just going to make this a key value pair. So anytime a user joins, the key will be their UID, and then the tracks will be attached to that UID so we can actually identify that user. So let's see, next we want to go ahead and add in an RTC client. So this client will be their user. So we actually create a client object, and then we use this client to log in, to join a specific room, to publish our tracks, and so on. So we created that client. We haven't set it yet. We're about to do that next. So really quick, I want to set my app ID, but for the purpose of this video, I don't want to have to blur this out every time I scroll to this point. You could put yours directly right here, but I'm just going to go ahead and put mine into a new file. So I could use environment variables. At this point, what I'm going to do is just create a file called appid.js, and then we're just going to create it here, export it, and then bring it into that file. So app ID, we're going to go ahead and actually paste in my real app ID. I'll blur this out, and then we're going to do export default. And that's going to be my app ID. And this way I can actually close this file out, and we never have to access this again. And then we just need to make that import. That's going to be app ID from, and we're just going to go back one file to appid.js. So that's with a capital I right there, .js. And I believe that should take care of it. Yeah, so that should bring in my app ID. And at this point, I should be ready to go ahead and actually initialize my client. So we're gonna go ahead and create a function here, and that's gonna create my client and grab my local audio tracks and actually set it into this value. So we're ready to go to that point here. So let's go ahead and jump in, and let's go ahead and call this function init RTC. So we're gonna initialize our RTC client. I'll just make it an async function out of habit here. And the first thing I want to do is go ahead and grab this client object and set this value. So we're going to do RTC client, and this is going to be equal to Agora RTC. So we're going to take that Agora RTC class that we imported at the top here, and we're just going to go ahead and call the create client method. So this create client method takes in a few parameters. So the first thing we're going to need is going to be the mode, and this is either going to be RTC or live. So we're just going to do RTC. And then we're going to set the codec here. So we're just going to do codec. And this is just going to be VP8. So we won't go into specifics here, but that creates our Agora client here. And now we're ready to move on. So now we can actually use this client, and I'm going to call the await method here. And we're just going to do RTC client. And what I want to do here is I actually want to join a channel. So we're going to call the join method. So that client gives us access to this join method. And in order to join a specific channel or create a channel, we're going to need some of our credentials, and we're going to use what we set up here. So we're going to use our RTC UID, our token, and our app ID. So the first thing we're going to need is going to be our app ID. Then we're going to need our room ID. So we need to specify the room ID itself. What room do we want to join or create? That is going to be main. After our room ID, we're going to need our token, which is going to be null right now, and our RTC UID. Okay, so we're joining a specific channel here. Once we join a channel, what I want to do is actually get my local audio tracks, and I want to publish them to that channel so all the remote users in that channel can actually get that audio track and then hear me speak when I'm speaking. So we're going to go ahead and call audio tracks.local audio tracks. So we're accessing this value right here. So right now it's null, and we're going to set that to our actual microphone audio. So we're going to call await, and we can do Agora RTC. So we're accessing that class, and we're doing create microphone audio track. So we're going to create that microphone audio track, and this is actually going to ask me permission, at least on the first time when we go to this website, for access to my microphone. So we're going to get that pop-up, and this is the method that actually does it. So it's going to take that return value and then set it here, and then the audio track is now going to be stored there. So after we do that, what I want to do is I want to publish that audio track. So if I get that track and set it here locally, the remote users aren't going to see this or hear this yet. So we want to go ahead and publish that, and then we're going to give them a way to actually receive that. So we're going to call RTC client, and we're going to call publish. So we want to publish our audio tracks. So we'll just do audio tracks dot local audio tracks. And let's see, I think I want to just do tracks. So I'm going to change this to not be plural because we're just going to have our one audio track. So we're going to change that to track, and then the remote user will be tracks. So we're taking our local audio tracks that we just set. So we set that into that value. We got the track, and then we published it. So once we do that, all I want to do is go ahead and actually add this user to the DOM. So inside of this init RTC method, we're just going to grab the members wrapper that we have in our HTML, and we're just going to append our new user to the DOM. So we're going to get an element by ID, and if we look at our index.html file, we have this members wrapper. So we're just going to add the user in there. So get element by ID, and we're going to call members. And in here, we're just going to go ahead and call insert adjacent HTML, and we want to specify the placement of it. So we'll just do before end, and I'll just try to scroll here. And then the actual element itself, what I'm going to do is actually create a container here. So we'll just call this user wrapper, and I want to be able to specify or clean up this code a little bit. So we're going to add that as the second parameter. So we're just adding this specific element before end inside of the members wrapper here. Okay, so let's go ahead and actually create that element here. So we're going to create this div. So we'll create a div here, and in this div, let's actually just close this up here. First thing I want to do is go ahead and actually pass in a paragraph tag for the user. So we want to output the user itself. So we'll style this up later, but for now we just want to be able to visually represent our user. So we'll create that paragraph tag, let's close it, and we're just going to pass in the member ID. So the local RTC UID, that's the only way we have to identify that user. We don't have any specific names or anything like that. And inside of this paragraph tag, or actually for the div, we're gonna go ahead and add in a class for some styling. So we're gonna create this styling here. We already have the CSS for this, so we're gonna create a speaker. That's gonna give us a styling for that. After we do this, we also want to add in another class for the user RTC UID. This is something that I'll explain later and why we need this specific value, but let's just go ahead and pass in RTC UID. Now, we also need a specific ID for this element because when a user leaves, we need a way to remove this user from the DOM. So what we're gonna do is identify that user by their UID and then find that element within our DOM and remove that element. So specifically, we need a RTC ID here. So let's go ahead and set this value, and we're just going to call this by RTC UID. So that's going to be the ID to the element. We have these values set, and that should be good for now. So now we want to go ahead and actually trigger this. So we want to trigger this when this form is submitted. So anytime this form is submitted right now, we're not going to actually add in the name here. We're just going to add in an onSubmit event listener. When that form is submitted, we want to go ahead and call this method and activate everything. So nothing's going to happen until that form is actually submitted. So let's go ahead and actually find that. So we'll just do lobby form, and that's going to be document.get element by ID. Right now that form has an ID of form, and we're just going to do, let's see, actually we'll just receive that form value, and we're just going to go ahead and create a new function that's going to initialize all this, and then we'll add the event listener to this. So give me 1 second, let's build this out. So we're going to create a function, and this is going to be called enter room. So we want to enter this room. I'll make it an async function here. We're going to want to take in the event itself. And let's go ahead and create this. So when this form is submitted, we're going to want to call e.prevent default. So we don't want to have the form perform its normal functionality. We want to prevent default. And then we just want to init RTC. So we're just going to initialize this function when the form is submitted. So we're actually going to trigger this function itself because there is going to be more logic that we want to add to this. So we're going to initialize that. And what we need to do is we actually want to go ahead and hide that lobby form. So whenever we submit, we want that form to go away, and we want the room header to appear. So remember that this header is actually hidden. So we want it to appear when we join, so that way we have our leave buttons there, and then we want the form to be hidden. So lobby form.style, and then we'll do .display, and this is going to be set to none. So we want to go ahead and hide that. Then we want to go ahead and take that room header. So we'll do document.get element by ID. That's going to be room hyphen header, and we're just going to do .style.display, and we're just going to display this as flex. So usually you just do block, but we actually want it to be a flex element, so we'll just do that. Don't want to mess up our styling. And that should be it. So when we enter a room, we're going to initiate RTC, hide the form, display the header, and then we want to go ahead and add in the event listener. So we're just going to do lobby form.add event listener, and on submit. So whenever that button is clicked, we have submitted our form, and we're just going to call enter room. Okay, so let's quickly recap that. We have our initiate RTC function. It just goes ahead and gets our local audio track. It publishes it, adds our member to the DOM. Then we call the function, hide the form, display the header. So the remote user won't actually be able to see or hear us just yet. At this point, it's just here. Usually with RTC, you can do video too, so I always mix that up. They won't be able to hear us yet, and that's because on that remote end, we need to actually listen for when that user joins and then subscribe to their tracks, but we'll take care of that in a second. So let's go ahead and actually run our development server. So we're going to go ahead and call npm run dev, and let's just see what we have so far. So if I open this up here, this is our application. I want to call inspect element. And if I'm seeing all this, it means that everything's working all right. So it means our Agora SDK is properly installed here. It's configured. If I hit enter room, hopefully we're going to see something here that shows we're entering a room and no errors pop up from that. So let's go ahead and click enter. And immediately what's going to happen is Agora is going to ask us to use our microphone. So you're going to see this alert right here, and that's a good thing. So that's that create microphone and audio tracks method. And let's just go ahead and call allow. So that should happen on the first run here. So right away, I don't see any errors. So all this stuff is happening. This is the Agora SDK. Let's just kind of scroll through it. Our header now appears, and we see our local user here. So I can also leave. Well, actually the leave button doesn't work, but if I click enter, it's actually gonna go ahead and leave automatically, and then I can re-enter a room. Now, at this point, I don't have the leave functionality in here, so we'll add that in. And you notice I have a new UID because I refreshed that. And if a remote user joins, we're actually gonna join the same channel, but we're not gonna see each other. So I'm gonna switch between the two tabs. The users don't see each other, so after we add in that exit functionality, we're gonna add in that ability to actually see the users in that channel. So let's go ahead and just hit enter. We'll refresh that. So everything's working correctly. We joined a channel, and let's just go back to our code here. So the next thing I want to do is create that leave functionality. So I'll just leave my server on here, and we're going to create the leave room function. So let's see. I want to go ahead and add that underneath enter room. So we'll just go ahead and call let leave room. And let's just talk about everything that's going to happen when we leave a room here. So first of all, let's just go ahead and stop our audio tracks and then close them. So we're actually going to go ahead and call the audio tracks.local audio tracks method here, or that key right here. So we're going to get our local audio tracks, and we're going to call stop. So that's going to stop our audio track from being published. Now, once we do that, we want to actually go ahead and close that specific audio track. So local audio track.close. So stopping a track stops a track, but we can, in theory, start it again. But once we call close, we need to create a new audio track. That track is closed, and that's it. So we stop it, and then we close that track. Now, after we close the track, what I want to do is go ahead and go to our client object here, and we're just going to call the unpublished method. So this is going to go ahead and unpublish our track, so our remote users will no longer have it. And once we call unpublish, I'm just going to go ahead and leave that specific channel. So we're going to call RTC client.leave. So this is how we're taking care of all that functionality of leaving a channel altogether. So our remote user will respond to all of these events here in a second once we build that in. So once we do that, what we want to do is go ahead and display our form again. So we'll just do document.getElementById. We'll grab that form, and we'll just do .style.display, and we'll just do block. So once that form, or once we leave, we want to make sure to display that form again so a user can rejoin. So we're kind of sending that user back to the lobby. We also want to hide our header. So what I'll do is actually grab this right here and paste this down here. So on leave room, we'll just do display none. So we'll just kind of reverse that. And we're going to go ahead and grab all our members. So document.getElementById. We'll get that members wrapper again. And we're just going to go ahead and do inner HTML, and we're just going to set this to an empty string. So I just want to remove all those members once we leave. So we're going to leave the room, and last thing I need to do here is add in the event listener. So we'll just go ahead and get the leave icon. So inside of our HTML, our leave icon is called leave icon. So we'll grab that. So document.getElementById leave icon, and we're just going to go ahead and do add event listener, and this is going to be on click. So when we click this, we just want to go ahead and trigger the leave room functionality. All right, so let's go ahead and check this out. I want to make sure I can leave and re-enter a room. So we'll watch the console. I'm going to enter a room, and then when I leave it, I can re-enter it. So our user ID is still the same, and we can go back and forth. But the remote users still can't see this user. So let's go ahead and build out the functionality for this right here. So at this point, we have some event listeners that we can actually build out that respond to any time this user right here calls publish, and then when we actually join a specific channel here. So we're going to need to build in those event listeners and use the callbacks to trigger the functions we're about to create. So let's jump into this init RTC method, and the first event I actually want to listen for is whenever a remote user calls this join method. So when they join, I want all the other users in the channel to know about this, and I want something to happen on the other end. So what we're going to do first is actually create the event listener, and then we'll create the corresponding function. So we're going to call RTC client. So within this init RTC method, once everything is ready to go, our client is ready, let's go ahead and call the on method, and we have a bunch of different events we can actually listen for, and this one is going to be user joined. And the function that we want to trigger, and we're about to create this, is going to be called handle user joined. So this is going to be that function that triggers anytime a user calls this method. So we'll go ahead and create this handle user joined function, and we'll just see how this works and what it actually does. So let's go ahead and call handle user joined. We'll make this an async function. And one of the parameters we get access to is going to be that user. So the user object that joined, the remote user. And what I can actually do is go ahead and call, or we'll just console this out. We'll just do console.log, and we just want to see the new user. So we'll just say a new user has joined, and I actually just lost one of my keys and had to put that back on, so that threw me off. So we just want to see that current user. So what we're going to do is we'll open up two screens side by side, and we'll join from one room, and then we'll watch the console as the other user joins, and we'll just see that event actually get fired off. So let's go ahead and open up one tab here. We'll bring in this next one. We can even make this one smaller, and let's just go ahead and do inspect element. So right now, nobody is inside of this room, and we're just going to go ahead and see what happens. So we're going to enter a room, so we see some stuff happen in the console, and now this remote user, this one right here, user number 2, is going to join. So when we join, we see some stuff happen here in the console. So let's go ahead and look at this right here. So this message, so we'll just do a new user has joined, and we want to take a look at that user object. So if I look at this right here, here is the user object. We see the UID for this user, that's 682. There is going to be the audio track somewhere down here. So we have all this information about that user. So we can actually leave. And then if we try to join again, so let's actually refresh it. We'll enter. And then when this user enters, we see this callback get fired off. So that's what's happening, is triggering that event for all those users. So what do I want to happen when this user joins? Well, right away, all I want to do here is I just want to see this remote user. So we're not actually subscribing to their audio tracks. We still won't hear them. I just want to make sure that new user gets added to the DOM. So let's go ahead and do this. We'll create a user wrapper. So I'm actually going to grab this value from the init RTC method. We're just going to take that same value right here, and we're just going to go into this members wrapper, and we'll actually paste this in here. So when a new user joins, we want to create a new HTML element, and then we want to go ahead and make sure they're added to the DOM. Now, this user object is going to change up a few things. We're not just getting our RTC UID. We're going to get the user.uid method. So in the console, you saw that UID value. So we're just going to go ahead and update all of these. So let's save it, and let's take a look at this. So now I can actually close this out. Let's enter a room. And then when this user enters, let's go ahead and see what happens. There we go. So we see that remote user appear right here. So really quick before we move on, I just paused the video and I wanted to fix this error that I noticed in our code, and I want to show you what I'm talking about, and then we'll make that quick fix. So when I enter from this screen right here and then I join with another user, we're going to notice this user appear on this user screen, but not back here. And that's really just in the placement of our code. Sometimes it works and sometimes it doesn't, but really what should happen is this original user should also be visible right here. So I want to fix this, and then we'll move on from there. So let's go ahead and go back into our code. And the issue is really just in the placement of where we added this event listener. I think it's just in the order that it's called. We just need to go ahead and add this right underneath our initialization of the RTC client. So let's go ahead and save it, and let's give this a test. So when I join with user number 1 and then user number 2, there we go. I should see that user on everybody's screen. So I'll join again, we'll enter, and there we go. All 3 users should see each other. So the next thing I want to do is make sure we can actually hear each other's audio. So let's go ahead and build in the event listener for that. So for this, the event listener is going to be RTC client.on, and then this is going to be user published. So user-published. So when the user publishes their audio, we're going to call a method called handle user published. And we're going to build this function right now. So with this function, what we want to do is simply respond to when a user publishes their track and subscribe to their track. So we need all the users to subscribe to each other's audio tracks in order to actually hear each other. So we'll add this underneath handle user joined. Let's go ahead and build this method out. So this is going to be let handle user published. We'll make sure it's an async function. And with this method, we get access to the user and then the media type. And the media type here is going to be an audio track, but when you are doing video tracks, you typically want both the audio and video track. So that's why this value or parameter is actually useful to us. So when a remote user publishes their audio track, what we want to do is first have our client object subscribe to that track. Then we want to go ahead and set that remote track within this key value pair so we can actually store all those remote users. And then we want to play that track so we can actually hear it. So on publish, let's first subscribe to that track. So on handle user published, we're going to go ahead and take our RTC client and we're going to call subscribe here. So we'll call subscribe. We're going to pass in the user, and there's going to be a lot of values with that user object, and we're going to pass in the media type. So the media type is either going to be audio or video. So it's just going to be a string. Now with RTC, a lot of people use this for video. So usually you want to check and see the media type itself, because you do play those tracks differently. So we're first going to check the media type. And if this is audio, this is how we're going to play that audio track. So it's just a good check to put in there, just because if you're using RTC, video is a common thing, and it's nice to be able to differentiate these two. So if the media type is audio, first let's go ahead and take our audio tracks here, and we're going to get the remote audio tracks, and we're going to set the user.uid and set this user's audio track. So this should be a unique value because it's the UID of that specific user. And within the array, we're going to take user.audio track, and we're going to pass it in. So now we're actually going to store the user's audio track that was passed in through here, right? So they just published it. Now the next thing we want to do is just go ahead and play the audio track. So we're going to call user.audio track, and we're going to call .play. Okay, so that should go ahead and just play the audio track, and I probably should call await right here because I do need time to subscribe to this user's media track here, or audio track. So we're going to call await right there, and I'm going to give this a test, and you should hear an echo right now. So I'm going to play this locally, so it should sound pretty bad, but at least we're going to know that it works. So once you test this out locally, you might hear that echo, and just go ahead and refresh the browser to leave. So let's go ahead and hit enter. We joined, and then when the remote user joins, now we should hear it. So we hear that loud echo, and I'm just going to go ahead and refresh it to leave. So the audio track is working. We can now see the user, we're subscribing to their track, but look what happened here. So I just left, and my user is still within this browser right here. So a user can join and leave, but that stays. So we want to subscribe to one more event, and that is going to be the user left event. So when a user leaves that specific channel, we want to make sure that this right here, I guess that wrapper or the user speaker wrapper is just removed. So we want to know when a user leaves. So let's go ahead and take care of that. And for this, we're going to go ahead and add in one more event listener. And let's see, we'll go back up to an RTC, and we're just going to add this in right here. So RTC client and .on, this is going to be user-left. So when a user leaves, we're going to call the handle user left function. And let's just go ahead and build out this function. So we'll keep this in order. We have user joined, user published, and we're going to create handle user left. And we're going to make this an async function. We're going to go ahead and pass in the user object, finish up this function, and we're going to do two things here. So this is going to be a very simple method here. The first thing is we want to go ahead and go into this audio track right here, and we want to go ahead and simply remove the user from this audio track. So all the remote audio tracks, we want to get that user by the UID and remove that track from here. So let's go ahead and do that. So we're going to bring this back up here to handle user left, and we're going to call delete, and we'll go into audio tracks.remote audio tracks, and we have the user's UID. So we're just going to go ahead and delete it. We call that delete method. And then what we want to do is actually remove the user's DOM element. So you notice that I specifically put in an ID with a user's UID. So that means every single wrapper for each user has a specific UID, and we're just going to go ahead and remove it by that, where it's going to be an ID, but the value is going to be that user's UID, which should be unique. So let's go ahead and do that. So we're just going to go ahead and grab that element, document.getElementsById, and we're going to pass in the user.uid value, and we're just going to call remove. So let's go ahead and save it, and let's test this out now. So we'll go back here. Let's go ahead and close this console out. We're going to enter a room. We see our user. We're going to enter with this user. We'll hear an echo. When I leave, that user should be gone now. So I'll go ahead and leave with this user. And let's go ahead and enter here. And we'll leave. And there we go. So now as users join and leave, we actually stop listening to their audio track, and we actually remove them from the DOM. So that's it for this video. In the next video, what we're going to do is work on the volume indicator. So right now, my volume is technically playing, but there's no way of knowing what user is talking. In a video, maybe you can see somebody speaking, so that's kind of your indicator, but we want to highlight each user, and we're just going to use this green color that's going to turn on every time you speak and then turn off every time you're done talking. So we'll do that in the next video, so I'll see you there.